Welcome to the Troy Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are so glad to have you all online, and I'd like to give a special welcome to my churches in Endicott and Deary. This is new for us all, and with these challenges come new opportunities, and so we're going to navigate through this time together. I want to welcome everybody else that's joining us. So glad to have you with us. A couple of announcements for our churches locally. Number one, the ABC Food Truck is still planning to come to the Moscow School, so if you've placed orders, you can go to that Sunday from 6 to 7 and pick up the things that you've ordered then. Also, our Steps to Christ book club is meeting on Tuesday, and we will be going through chapter 9, and that study is available online on the Troy Facebook page as well. So, a couple of things that I'd like to point out at this time that we find ourselves in. What can we be doing as a church when we can't meet in the church? We've talked about this before. The church is not a building, so this actually creates some opportunities for us. But I want to give you 10 things that we can do as a church right now. Here's number 1. Call a friend. Think today of who you can connect with. And if you can connect with 1 or 2 friends on the phone, do that. And go ahead and look through our church directory as well and pray through who would God have you connect with right now. Along a similar lines, number 2, write a letter. I heard of, I think it was June Miner, that was writing some letters with her grandchildren and sending them to people in nursing homes. All of us can do this collectively. Kids love to write letters, and think of people that you can send it to and connect in that way. Number 3, support the church. Now there's lots of ways you can do this. To start off with, pray for your church leaders. Pray for your pastors as we all navigate this tension together. And then we're not meeting in church, but the church still has expenses. If you can, support the church in that way. I'll have more on that in a second. But I would specifically say the Good Samaritan Fund. When financial times get heavy, we have that fund to help people stay afloat. So that's another thing you can do by supporting your church. Number 4, donate to the food bank. We have 3 fantastic food banks in this community, in Troy, in Deary, and Endicott. And as times get tough, we're going to need to help keep these food banks afloat. So check in with the managers there. In Troy, it's Letha. In Deary, it's Mike. And in Endicott, it's Dave. All wonderful managers, and they can help guide what our local food banks need. Number 5, invite your friends to connect online. Make sure that they know how. If you have an older grandparent or just anybody that is looking for ways to stay connected to church right now, invite them to join this local community, because we can stay connected at this time through social media. It's funny because a couple weeks ago I gave a sermon called The TechWise Family, where I mentioned some of the pitfalls of technology. Well, right now everybody is using technology, and we see the tool that comes with that. So invite a friend to connect to a local church service. Number 6, take these health precautions seriously. You know, my sister is a neonatologist in Spokane, and all of our doctors and health professionals are going to find themselves starting to be overrun. And so when the advice is to have social distancing, let's do our part and try to take that advice seriously. Number 7, fact check news stories. With everything going on, there is a lot of conspiracy theories. We see disinformation everywhere, and I think it is the Christian duty to make sure that we get things right. If you think something sounds bizarre, before you pass that on, make sure that you find out that it's true or not. That is one of our Christian duties. Number 8, love your neighbor. This is one of the basic commands that Jesus gave us. And so connect, check in locally, see how people are doing, and connect with your church. Love your neighbor. And part of that means to take precautions. If there's people in the vulnerable category that have an immune compromise or they're older, be careful with the way that you interact with them, but make sure you don't neglect to connect with them. Number 9, support our healthcare workers. Let them know that we're praying for them. Let them know that we're taking their advice seriously. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly in this age of disconnection, start each day making the commitment to connect with Jesus. That is our grounding. When everything around us seems like it's just been turned upside down, when we're feeling the anxiety and the stress, and we long for a routine, don't worry about the news first thing in the morning, what the latest update on this virus is. Make the commitment first thing each day to connect with Jesus. So those are 10 things that we can do as a church right now, and we're going to need to think creatively as we move forward with this. The next thing that I'd like to focus on is that part of supporting the church through our tithes and offerings. Now, at the Troy Church, our treasurer is Lori, and you can always give your checks directly to her. You can mail them to her, or you can go online to the Troy Seventh-day Adventist Facebook page and contribute that way. With the Deary Church, the treasurer is Dave, and you can continue to just give your checks directly to him. We will have the online component coming up soon. And then at the Endicott Church, our treasurer is Judy, and you can continue to give the checks to her, or also donate online at the Endicott Seventh-day Adventist Facebook page, our website. Now, let's get started with a word of prayer, and then we'll go into our sermon today. So please, wherever you are, let's take a moment, refresh, breathe, and pray together. Dear Father in heaven, on this Sabbath, as churches across the country are doing a new thing, I pray that you can create a new work within us. May these challenges lead to opportunities. May we take the advice of the health profession seriously. May we look out for one another. And most importantly, may we seek you first, claiming the promise that if we ask, we will receive, that if we seek, we will find, and if we knock, the door will be opened unto us. May we arise to the challenge, and may we be the church that you've called us to be. We pray these things, Jesus, in your name. Amen. It's been an interesting couple of weeks, hasn't it? In some ways, it feels as if the world has fundamentally changed just overnight. The coronavirus has seemed to affect everything from hospitals to schools, the stock market, and our own emotional and physical well-being. Although the coronavirus is new, the world has gone through turbulent times before. We will get through this. And with God on our side, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. That quote obviously is taken from President Roosevelt's inauguration address. He gave that on March 4, 1933, as the swearing-in ceremony took place. And as he swore in, Roosevelt placed his hand on a Bible open to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It remains the oldest Bible that has ever been used in a presidential inauguration ceremony. I believe it was from 1686 that was published. But 1 Corinthians 13 is a good chapter to commit to being a leader. Paul says in Corinthians that love is the most excellent way. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not easily angered. Love keeps no record of wrongs, but rejoices with the truth. Love always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. It's easy to see the faults in leaders, to see the challenges, the shortcomings, and point a critical finger. So it's good to be reminded that love offers a more excellent way. We are in this together. It takes all of our faith, all of our hope, and all of our love. Perhaps that is why Roosevelt had in mind as he placed his hand on the Bible and addressed a nation in crisis. America was in the middle of a Great Depression. People were out of work, and there was rumors of war. The nation was anxious. He began his talk by speaking candidly. He said, "This is the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. He talked about some of the obstacles that America was going through, and then he said his famous line. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Compared with the perils with our forefathers conquered because they believed and were not afraid, we have still much to be thankful for. Nature still offers her bounty, and human efforts have multiplied. Plenty is at our doorstep. But then he went on to explain the challenges as the result of greed and financial mistakes. Faced by failure of credit, unscrupulous money changers have proposed only the lending of more money. Stripped of the lure of profit by which to induce our people to follow their false leadership, they have resorted to exhortations, pleading tearfully for restored confidence. They know only the rules of a generation of self-seekers. They have no vision. And when there is no vision, the people perish. Sounds a little bit like our times, with the stock market crashing and politicians taking advantage. Roosevelt spoke to that in the 1930s. The money changers have fled from the high seats in the temple of our civilization. We may now restore the temple to the ancient truths. The measure of the restoration lies in the extent to which we apply social values more noble than mere monetary profit. Happiness lies not in the mere possessions of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of creative effort. The joy and moral stimulation of work no longer must be forgotten in the mad chase of evanescent profits. These dark days will be worth all they cost us if they teach us that our true destiny is not to be ministered onto, but to minister to ourselves and to our fellow men. Recognition of the falsity of material wealth as the standard of success goes hand in hand with the abandonment of the false belief that public office and high political position are to be valued only by the standards of pride, of place, and personal profit. And there must be an end to a conduct in banking and in business which too often has given to a sacred trust the likeness of callous and selfish wrongdoing. Small wonder that confidence languishes, for it thrives only on honesty, on honor, on the sacredness of obligations, on faithful protection, on unselfish performance. Without them, it cannot live. What Roosevelt spoke to in the 1930s in the midst of a Great Depression remains true right now. Confidence can be restored by morality, by holding accountable people that have abused trust. He continued, "We now realize, as we have never realized before, our interdependence on each other. That we can not merely take, but we must give as well. That if we are to go forward, we must move as a trained and loyal army willing to sacrifice for the good of the common discipline. Because without such discipline, no progress is made. No leadership becomes effective." Skipping towards the end, Roosevelt concludes with this: "We face the days that lie before us in the warm courage of the national unity, with the clear consciousness of seeking old and precious moral values, with the satisfaction that comes from the stern performance of duty by old and young alike." And then his last line: "In this dedication of a nation, we humbly ask the blessing of God. May He protect each and every one of us. May He guide me in the days to come." May He guide me in the days to come. My wife and I, as we've seen the chaos and seen the anxiety of those around us and the stock market collapse, have had some frank conversations. What will be our role? What is the role in the church in this moment? And if it gets worse, what are we willing to do? As I have these kinds of conversations, I realize how fundamentally selfish I am in some ways. One of my pastor friends told me that his wife and him are thinking about adding on to their house where they have an attic in case another family eventually would need to come in. Now, we might not be at this point. We hope that the world will go back to the way that it was before, and that may be the case. But if this moment is an opportunity to test ourselves, to test the nation, may we not fail this test, to think of others as being better than ourselves, to be the church for such a time as this. May he guide us in the days to come. You know, our grandparents were called to war. What the health professionals are telling us to do is we're being called to sit on our couch and watch Netflix. Now, in all seriousness, that is important to do, to follow the counsel of the health professionals, to social distance ourselves. But the calling for the church goes beyond that. Beyond just entertaining ourselves at this time, how can we make a difference right now? And it is a call to action. It's a call to engage in this war against an enemy that we cannot even see. How will we respond to this moment? We are in the midst of a highly teachable moment. There's no doubt that this period will be referred to for the rest of our lifetimes. We have a chance to go deep and to go broad. Globally, we're in this together. Depth is being forced on us by great suffering, which, as I like to say, always leads to great love. That's Richard Rohr. The Bible text that came to my mind as I was reflecting on this cultural moment comes from 1 John 4 and verse 18. In this chapter, John is speaking. He says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out all fear." All around us, there are things that we could be afraid of, understandably so. But when we love first, our commitment drives us into an action of courage and reason and wisdom that all combine together to allow us to love God and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And when this is our motive, we are not afraid. We will take the challenges that come before us and rise to the opportunity to help one another, to unite in such a way that we can be, and proudly say, the United States. But Americans and nations fall. The church, God says, will not fall so long as he is with it. So let's commit to being the church and to not be afraid, but to be perfected by love. As we look at some examples of how the church has risen to the occasion before, we can learn some things through what the early church did in the response to this moment with the coronavirus. The early church was no stranger to plagues, epidemics, and mass hysteria. In fact, according to both Christian and also non-Christian accounts, one of the main catalysts for the church's explosive growth in its early years was how Christians navigated disease, suffering, and death. The church's posture made such a strong impression on Roman society that even pagan Roman emperors complained to pagan priests about their declining numbers, telling them to step up their game. So what did Christians do differently that shook the Roman Empire? And what can the early church teach us in light of the coronavirus? In AD 249 to 262, Western civilization was devastated by one of the deadliest pandemics in its history. Though the exact cause of the plagues is uncertain, the city of Rome was said to have lost an estimated 5,000 people a day at the height of the outbreak. One eyewitness, Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria, wrote that although the plague did not discriminate between Christians and non-Christians, its full impact fell on non-Christians. Having noted the difference between Christian and non-Christian responses to the plague, he says of the non-Christians in Alexandria, "At the first onset of the disease, they pushed the sufferers away and fled from their dearest, throwing them into the roads before they were dead and treating unburied corpses as dirt, hoping thereby to avert the spread and contagion of the fatal disease. But do what they might, they found it difficult to escape." Similarly, Emperor Julian known as the Apostate. This was the emperor who was the last non-Christian ruler of the Roman Empire. In AD 362, he wrote a letter complaining that the Hellenists needed to match the Christians in virtue, blaming the recent growth of Christianity on their benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives. Elsewhere, he wrote, "For it is a disgrace that the impious Christians support not only their own poor, but ours as well." Basically telling his people, the Christians are putting us to shame. We got to do better than this. Now, compare that non-Christian response to the Christian response to the epidemics. If the non-Christian response to the plague was characterized by self-protection, self-preservation, and avoiding the sick at all costs, the Christian response was the opposite. According to Dionysius, the plague served as a schooling and testing for Christians. In a detailed description of how Christians responded to the plague in Alexandria, he writes of how the best among them honorably served the sick until they themselves caught the disease and died. In a biography of Cyprian of Carthage, Pontius writes of how the bishop reminded believers to serve not only fellow Christians, but also non-Christians during the plague. In the biography he said this, "There is nothing remarkable in cherishing merely our own people with the due attentions of love, but that one might become become perfect who should do something more than heathen men or publicans, one who, overcoming evil with good, and practicing a merciful kindness like that of God, should love his enemies as well. Thus the good was done to all men, and not merely to the household of faith." The impact of this service was twofold. Number one, Christian sacrifice for their fellow believers stunned the unbelieving world as they witnessed the communal love like they'd never seen. And two, Christian sacrifice for non-Christians resulted in the early church experiencing exponential growth as non-Christian survivors who benefited from the care of their Christian neighbors converted to the faith in mass. If you want to read more about these details, I got them from Moses Lee, who wrote an excellent article for the Gospel Coalition. The article is titled "Christian Responses to the Epidemics." Earlier this week on Facebook, somebody that I follow named Shane Claiborne printed off this note that he got from a friend. And I think it speaks to this moment that we find ourselves in. It says, "Now is the time for our faith has prepared us. Now is the moment when all that we believe can be put to work. Now we can turn to the inner resources we have been developing over these many years to face the challenge of a world in desperate need. We are not afraid of this crisis, for we have been made ready for it. We have devoted our lives to the belief that something greater than fear or disease guides human history. We have studied, prayed, and grown in the Spirit. Now we come to the call to use what we believe. Our people need hope, confidence, courage, and compassion, the very things for which we have been trained. We are the calm in the midst of a storm. Stand your ground and let your light so shine that others may see it and find their faith as well." Stephen Charleston. I think we get courage when we embrace our opportunity. In church, this is an opportunity. There's things that can make us afraid, but as we ask God to help us in this moment, we find a courage to be the neighbor that God has always asked us to be. And we can do that in safe ways, connecting, asking for God's guidance. I think of another time when the world was on edge. They were anxious. Literally, World War II was raging, and there was threats of bombs and atomic bombs, and people were afraid. In that moment, C.S. Lewis, through the airwaves, addressed the British people. And what he spoke of concerning the bombs, I think speaks in this zeitgeist, in this moment right now, to the fear that people have over the coronavirus. So replace bombs with coronavirus and listen to what C.S. Lewis said all those years ago. Here's what he says. In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. You and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. And quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of a painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances, and which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies. A microbe can do that. But they need not dominate our minds. As Roosevelt said at his inauguration address, hand placed on the oldest Bible at an inauguration address to the chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. He begins by speaking plainly and bluntly. Yes, there was a depression. Yes, there was human reasons that people could be afraid. But he said it plainly. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And the reason I think that remains true is because this is an ancient ethic of the Bible itself, older than any president, older than any nation. It is the courage for a time of fear. There is no fear in love, because perfect love drives out all fear. Church, now is the time to rise. Let's stay connected to one another. Let's visit one another in ways that we can, by phone call, by writing a letter, by email. We can make it through this, and as we make it through this, we will be the stronger for it. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, I thank you that you are a God who hears and a God who sees, and you promise that if we cast all of our cares upon you, you will care for us. You promise in Isaiah 26:3 that you will keep us in perfect peace if we keep our eyes on you. Help us to be the kind of neighbors you've called us to be. Help us to love you and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Help us to be the church for such a time as this. We pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen.